Talk.
Yeah. Hello, 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 everyone.
How are
Hello.
you? How you doing?
I'm doing good today. I'm doing good. Um, Enjoying this topic very much so, as it's right on point. How about you too?
I'm doing pretty good today. Had some struggles this week, but doing well today.
Ah,
We're so glad Melanie has joined us today. Pastor Melanie has joined us, and we're we're ready to go. We've been already conversing over everything that we've been learning and applying. I think that's one of the keys that I love about this book is now let's live this. It's not just talk
hmm
about it, but let's live it. So I'm excited about that. Let's just jump into this today. Let's first of all let's talk about why boundaries are necessary. Let's talk about why they are necessary. What are their purposes?
well, I think we understand that boundaries, healthy boundaries, are actually put in place, right? As it says here on the screen, a healthy boundary is put in place to help you stay self-controlled and safe, right? So I put an emphasis on the self-controlled and safe as well because a healthy boundary, you will identify that I have to maintain my boundaries as well as make sure that I maintain my boundaries, and I put boundaries in place for others that are going to keep me safe and healthy, right? And so and this chapter really dove in and talked about the importance and the impact, not just on our physical safety, but our internal safety, right? Our health, our not just mental but physical health and well-being. So,
Yeah, that was years ago. Was it Henry Cloud and John Townsend wrote a book on boundaries, and I remember
Yeah.
teaching that book and sharing it. And the thing that happened was there were people who were fearful because they were saying that people were going to start saying no who had said yes, and so they were starting to have the ability and realize I was empowered to say no. I'm empowered to not do something. And so there was this fear that boundaries were going to um, impact their lives. But when we state it this way, which I believe you stated perfectly, is that it is so that I can be self-controlled, that I don't overextend myself to the point to the point where I'm no longer any good to me or anybody else. Your thoughts, Mel?
I think for me this week, as I was going over the chapters and reading, um, I realized that I had to place boundaries on myself so that I could be safe. One of the things I was struggling with this week was depression. And I personally don't like to say that because it's like, okay, I don't get depressed, but I do. And so when I start doing some self awareness, is like, okay, where is this depression coming from? And I realized that the depression for me was coming from a place of I was having some health challenges this week, and I had difficulty walking and different things like that. And so I was like, and I'm stuck in the house and I can't go anywhere and I can't. And I started looking at all of the things that I couldn't do. But then when I started, reflecting on the chapter, and it's like, wait a minute, I'm gonna have to set some boundaries on myself. And then, so I had to prepare to say, okay, when I'm in this state, what are some of the things that I could do when I want to get out of the house? What are some of the things? It's like, okay, I have a niece that lives nearby, and she would be able to pick me up. I have other individuals that can help me go places, and I do sometimes even have issues asking Clyde um, to take me places, 'cause I'm like, okay, he worked a long day or he already had to drive and I don't want to bother him. And, and it's like, wait a minute. No, this is about me, my happiness. And to get out of the funk of depression, I started asking, and people were saying yes because I asked. So I had to get out of that funk of what I couldn't do to what I could do. And it's like, okay, Melanie, you wouldn't want anybody else to treat you like this. So don't
You
treat
know,
yourself like this.
you
So,
know, Melanie, you brought up a key point though, when and we don't really pay attention to that. You brought up how, and it always circles back to this, right? The importance of communication
mhm,
when it comes to our boundaries, even as it relates to what we need. Communicating what we need is a part of having a healthy boundary,
mhm,
because I can communicate what I need and what I don't want as well.
right.
I
So
think two things come to mind as she shared that. One was, and we'll get into it a little later, but um, the fight, the flight, and the freeze.
yep.
It
Mhm,
didn't have anything to do with necessarily outside forces, but it was internal that said, if I ask for this, I'm going to infringe, and they might reject me. They might, they turn me down. That, and knowing that I can ask, and not have to, and really says I'm dealing with the fact that I can ask. I set a boundary that I can't even ask. um,
right.
but I realize I can ask, and I love the way that she talks about grace in the conversation. And so one of the things it said was to say what you and mean what you say, but say it, but don't say it mean. So it's not just asking, but in asking in a way that says, I realize you don't have to do this, but would you mind doing that? And that's the thing, is that they can say no. They can have a boundary
Right.
and say no, and I'm okay with that, right?
Right.
And I don't have to be fearful that I'm overstepping a boundary that I put in place, right? But I
Right.
realize that I'm going to allow them to, if it's going to infringe upon them, they can say no, and I'm okay with that,
Yeah,
because I'm asking because this is something that I need.
absolutely. And you touched on something, Pastor, even in that, when you identified it's happened before, right? You touched on trauma, right? How some of the way that we might respond, and the way that when things happen to us, some of it is internalized based on a past history, or it's a trigger, right? And
Mhm.
so, especially, and I think it's going to be important for everyone who's putting new boundaries in place to be aware that we're going to step on some landmines that are triggers from our past. And so she was very again, I like the way she talked about being gracious with yourself too, because in this season of doing new things and implementing changes, or just even implementing boundaries with friends, family, whoever, if you're in a relationship, implementing those boundaries, it's going to be important that you recognize you may be triggered by their responses.
Yeah. There were three things that were identified, in regards to what we can control, and one of them being our environment. Um, that is sometimes challenging, especially if you have a large family in a small home. You feel like you can't control your environment. um, but I understanding that the environment is just not always what's around, but it's also what I allow in, right? What I spiritually and emotionally allow in. And so identifying that sometimes it's a breakout of saying I need some peace, so I need to find a space that I can control. And that sometimes is, it may be my mother. She used to go in the bathroom and read. So when she went to the bathroom, she's like, I'm going to read, I'm going to the library. And she closed the door. It's like, and don't nobody knock on the door, because she had created an environment where she could focus, where she could, and I think each of us need to know that. I think when I think of scriptures, I think about what God said. He said, "He that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High shall abide in the shadow." And so it says, "So what's my secret place?" That's an
Mm-hmm.
environment where I can go, where I can get restored, where I have control over that space.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that is so important, especially when you're in a small home or you have people living in your home. And sometimes you may have to reallocate space, right? When you have someone coming in, but it's a boundary nonetheless. But it's also finding that time. Um, and this again, this is like toward the end, especially if you find yourself triggered, making
Mhm.
sure you know where that space is, right?
Yeah,
Because when we are triggered, and I think we've talked about this several times, and the book, her therapist eloquently talks about it, right? Toward the end, he identifies that when we feel powerless, we can, for one, I think Melanie, you said we can pre-plan, we can rely on pre-planned and rehearsed boundaries. Your mom's pre-planned and rehearsed place to go was in her bathroom, right? To the
right.
library, her library. But it's knowing what we need and when we need it. Um, and how to get us to that place and bring down those anxieties that might cause us to go into a depression, that might cause us to lash out.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
One is not respecting our boundaries, and then getting us to a place to where we can calm ourselves down when that does happen.
The next thing she talked about is identifying what you are and are not willing to tolerate. Um, that that is sometimes challenging, because it says that I don't want to infringe on others' freedoms. And I think we see our culture right now is like everybody wants to have control over what everybody, I shouldn't say that. There are those who want to have control over what others do with their bodies, with their guns. It's sort of like, and it says, so what will we not tolerate? What is disadvantages to me? What are the things that I need to recognize that this outside of this space, that this is can't you can't occupy this space with those things.
Oh yeah, that's something, Pastor. I think we all need to take a moment even and identify that, because before I can accurately communicate to someone else what I will and will not, I am unwilling, right, to deal with, then I actually have to know for myself.
Right.
I have to know, Melanie, you made a key point as I had to pay attention. I had to sit back, right? And like what's going on? You had to ask yourself what was going on with you this week. Why am I feeling this way? But and when we take the time to pay attention to what are we feeling and why we're feeling it, then it's important to write it down and articulate, oh, this is something that I'm unwilling to deal with.
Yeah. Jonathan asked us to address this specific. He's working in social work example, but and a therapist. He says, when do you know it's time to set boundaries for your self care without feeling like you're letting someone down? And how do you know when it's time to turn it off? That's a really good example of I I have, and I think it's intentional. I think that's the thing, is that I intentionally recognize that I don't. There are times I can't have a conversation, and what Lisa says is this. She says that I don't have it to give.
Right.
I just don't have it. I forgive myself for being. I no, I don't forgive myself. I go ahead and comfort myself in that I'm human,
Absolutely.
because there are those who will try to put things off on you like you're superhuman. And I'm not. I'm human, and I fail, and I have times where I can give out, and there's times I just can't.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And that goes back to knowing what your limits are. And for me, there are often times where people will say, "Oh, you're good at doing flyers. Can you do flyers for this? And can you do flyers?" And it's like, um, no. And it's not even all the time that I don't have time, but I don't want to add that to my plate. If I add that to my plate, I won't have time. So I have to allow myself that free time to be able to say, nope, I won't be able to do that. And so those are the things where it's like, okay, know my limits. I'm quite sure there's other people that are able to do what I do, and I realize that I'm not God and I'm not the only one who know how to do something.
Yeah,
And so I've learned to say no, especially because sometimes with family, it's like, oh, you're just so dependable. It's like, and so this year I said, nope, this year I'm not biting my tongue for nothing. And my mother laughed and thought it was funny. And she said, when have you ever bit your tongue? And, and I'm like, sometimes I say yes to things that I really don't want to say yes to. So this year, it is really self care for me. So when I want to say no, it's no, and no is a complete sentence.
And there you have it. No, it's a complete sentence. When it comes to Jonathan's questions, when he says without feeling like you're letting someone down, here's the thing: if you do something when your cup is completely filled and you're tired, you're not only letting yourself down, but you're letting them down too, because you can't fully give something that you don't have. Right. And I think a lot of times we attempt to give from a full cup, and we're drained, right? um the commandment comes to mind is love your neighbor as you love yourself. So what that means is I'm going to take care of me so I can take care of you. One of my pillars, and Melly, you're familiar with this. One of my pillars is it focuses on making sure that we care for ourselves. And I want the culture for wholeness to peace to really focus in on us us as counselors, us as therapists, coaches, or whatever, anybody who has direct interaction with a client, you need to make sure that you've taken care of yourself so then we can effectively give our clients what they need.
yeah,
Because if I'm not in a place to where I can't take care of myself, then when they really need me, I'm in the hospital, I'm down, I'm sick, I'm throwing up. I can't communicate to you when I really need you because I didn't take care of me.
yeah.
So you're letting them down and you down when you don't say no, when you don't have it to give. I hope that helps, Jonathan.
And I think it's important that, and this goes back to giving grace to yourself, but it's also um, the what I identified before: say what you mean and mean what you say, but don't say it mean. And if you find yourself, you realize, that's not the way I want to say this. That's not the way that I want to articulate this. I can say no without being mean, but knowing
Hmm.
that my answer is no, but I don't have to fight it. I don't have to put bolster it so that they hear me, right. I had a friend who said, well, that's the only way they're gonna hear me. There's another way. You can say no, and it's done because you're not doing it. So you don't
Hmm.
have to yell. I'm not doing it. And
What?
And, and I have, and along with what Jonathan was saying, for me, it's like, okay, even if you feel like you're letting a person down, you still can say no. It's like I might be letting this, I really don't want to, but the answer is still no.
Right. I think she actually gave some resources on different ways to say no.
Hmm.
One of one of my mentors in the mentoring coaching program that I was in, that I'm in, he gave a resource, a saying no nicely, right? And so, what some of the ways in which I said, try telling that to a 3-year-old. That's funny. Good job with that, but I can say no to them too. Um, I'm sorry, no, not right now. I actually have to say no often to a 3-year-old and a 2-year-old, for the fact of that matter. But some ways of doing it is, as much as I would like to help you, I simply can't right now. Right? Then I'm sorry. I just prefer not to. I'm afraid I simply lack the bandwidth right now to commit to doing this.
Yeah.
Another one is, unfortunately, it's not in my best interest to take this on at the moment. And then I'm really stretched thin right now. And I promised myself I wouldn't take on anything else. And then, to be honest, this is just something I really don't want to do. And you can say that, and you can say it in a nice
Right.
tone,
Mhm.
right? Because tone is everything. Now, if I were
Yeah.
to say, to be honest, I just don't want to do it. Come on,
Right. You might spark something. Yeah.
right? But it's okay to
Mhm.
say no.
I,
So,
I
Jonathan,
was
for
reminded. I'm sorry.
go ahead.
I was reminded Aaron when he's about 2 or 3, and he wanted something in the kitchen, and it's like, no, you're not having it. And he just went into a tantrum, and I just stepped right over him and walked into the other room, and he was like, "You're not responding to this." I'm not. I
Mhm.
refused. The answer was no. And so if this is how you have to if this is how you're gonna respond to no, then so be it. And I think sometimes we realize is that I didn't say it mean, I didn't say it harsh, but the response you would have thought I had said it harsh, but I don't have nothing to do with that.
I,
Mhm.
I watch Monique. She's really good at saying no to the boys. But I experienced that with Ezekiel. He's like, honey, I don't want to go inside right now. Well, I'm sorry you don't want to go inside right now, but right now we have to go inside. And maybe we'll come outside later, or maybe we'll go for a walk later. But right now it's time to go inside. And then, of course, the tantrums come on. Well, we can always take a nap, right? Would you like to take a nap instead?
Yeah.
You're like, no, I don't want to take a nap. Well, which one do you want? You either want to go in right now or you want to take a nap right now. So I'm giving you options, but neither one of them what you want to do. Give them the
Mhm.
option.
Here's the other thing that I think is important, even with the 3-year-old. It's a boundary without real consequences will never be taken seriously. And
Absolutely.
so if I set a boundary and I never adhere to it, it's like, okay, you said that before. I'm ready for there's nothing there. And saying that there has to be a consequence to it. It's not a punishment. It's just that this is the boundary. And so when you this is the consequences to you violating my boundary.
Yeah, that reminds me of my niece when she was younger. My stepfather used to say, "If you keep that up, I'm gonna whoop you." And he would keep telling her, "If you do that again, I'm gonna whoop you." And she looked at him and she said, "Promise, promises, promises."
Oh my goodness.
So she knew he was not going to do anything. But on the complete opposite, my sister, she told her child, she was like, "If you don't quit playing with that," and she was driving, "If you don't quit playing with that, I'm gonna throw that toy out the window." And she was like, "Oh, I told him that I would throw the toy out the window if he kept going." So she had to do it. She threw the toy out the window. She was like, "Oh, I hope I don't get a ticket." But because but because she said that, she was like, she had to throw, like, you need to think about some of the things that you say. But she said it, she meant it, and she threw it out the window. So
Yeah. And how often, I think, how often do we give in because of this? I'm because of my personal feelings. And one of the things we're instructed to do is to think about why you set the boundary in the first place.
Yeah.
Why did you set the boundary? And that being rehearsed. Okay, I set this boundary for safety and for self control. Right? It's not that I'm trying to control another person. That's the other thing, is that I don't use boundaries to try to control them. I use boundaries to keep myself safe and to keep my self control, because I don't want to act out. I don't want to act up. And I need to be in a safe environment. And so realizing that I don't control people with my boundaries.
It's all about you. It is all about you. Now, I think it's important to recognize when you need those boundaries in place, like start to pay attention to when you're feeling triggered, Melanie, and you gave the perfect example of being able to feel, notice that I'm feeling depressed, I'm feeling sad, and pay attention to your environment and your surroundings and what's causing you to feel that way. Right. And then I think, not I think, I know it's important to be okay. And he mentions this at the end of the chapter too. Be okay with communicating that I'm triggered right now. Like I'm feeling triggered, right? And so right now I'm gonna have to take a moment. Jim, as she calls him, her Christian therapist, he says it is wise to avoid trying to continue a conversation when you are flooded with anxiety. So when you start to feel the anxiety going on in your body, the depression, it don't try to keep forcing them to hear your boundary. Right
Mhm.
now, I'm just going to have to take a step back. I need a moment.
I'd like to take Melanie's example specifically as it relates to depression. Depression is the consequence of not having a boundary,
Mhm.
Yes.
and not realizing that this is a boundary. I need this. I need an outlet. And if I don't, then the consequences are I'll be depressed. All that stuff that goes along with not having the boundary, which is a self boundary, but it says that I need to make sure that I've put some time in, some place that I can get out. Otherwise, I can go into breakdown, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think I would also suggest this for someone who's chemically dependent, or who's experiencing some addiction. That one of the reasons that you act out is because you have not set a boundary, and it's not the alcohol or the drugs or whatever it happens to be, but it says that what happens before that, because whatever happens before that, that trigger comes. I need to realize that I've gone too long without doing this that I should be doing. In 12 step programs, they tell you one of the things that my mother shared with me was reading. Reading is one of the things that it's an outlet and helps to stimulate the mind and stuff. She said, so I have to read. And so she said, when I don't read, then I end up eating. She said, when I don't take this time to meditate, then I end up doing so. There's a boundary that says I have to read. Now that's not imposed on anyone else. This is what I have to do because it's a boundary that's set for my health and my safety.
Yeah. So what I'm going to encourage you to identify those things when you are in a place of security. Like right now, we've had a good conversation. You may feel like you're in a good place because this is some good stuff. So he said, we can prepare for times of security. We can prepare in times of security. So we are strong in times of insecurity. Right. So when I am in a good place, this is when I need to take the time to prepare for and pre-plan, right, of how I'm going to communicate my boundaries when I feel like I'm powerless. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, that's good. Any last thoughts?
Oh, be kind to yourself. They put that emphasis on there. Be kind to yourself and pay attention when you get anxious. Take that time back. Take that time to allow your body to calm down. It was recommended that you drink some water. You take about 20 minutes so you can allow your prefrontal cortex, which is your thinking brain, to resume logical thinking. So when you're trying to respond and you're out of sorts, take some time, right?
Yeah.
Take some time and be kind to yourself. Don't be worried about letting nobody down, because when you ain't here, you letting them down anyway.
Yep.
All right.
And
In
be completely honest with yourself.
Yourself. Yep.
I would like, for those of you who are watching this, whether you're watching it later or you're watching it now, I'd like you to take a moment and just sort of fill this in, and respond to this in your own words. Why are healthy boundaries such a benefit to your well-being? Why are healthy boundaries such a benefit to your well-being? Take some time, think about it, and we'll love to read your responses on next week, if not today. But we'll love to hear what your thoughts. Why are healthy boundaries a benefit for your well-being?
All right.
Pastor Melanie, would you close us in prayer today?
Okay. Heavenly Father, we come thanking you and praising you for who you are. We just thank you for giving us wisdom and knowledge, oh God, and we ask that you help us to be able to apply what you have given us. And we ask that you touch everyone that is listening or will be listening, oh God, and we ask that you open their hearts and their minds to what you are saying to them on today. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.
Well, this has been great. It's been rich. And I thank you for joining us. And we will see you next week on Talk.